In this lesson, you should be able to identify musical devices in Mahler's composition, analyze some of the compositions by Mahler, listen and appreciate symphonies and excerpts of Mahler's music. You will be guided by the following essential question. How is the process of reflection contributed to the success of Gustav Mahler's music?
People write music for different reasons. Some people write music to worship God. Some want to celebrate nature. Some want to express joy or their frustrations. Gustav Mahler was different. He wanted to not just do all that, but also describe the whole world and the human experience. He tried to do this in 9 deeply personal symphonies of epic proportions. Mahler's Second Symphony, known as the Resurrection, asks 2 big questions. What happens after death? And what is the meaning of life? And it all starts with the funeral. We stand at a funeral of a well-loved person and reflect on the life he lived. We realize that everyone suffers and has to die eventually. In that moment, we ask, what now? Do we exist after death? Is life a cruel joke? To go on living, we need answers. Unfortunately, we leave the funeral with these questions left unanswered. From a cloudless sky, a ray of pure sunlight illuminates a happy moment from the person's life. And the not-so-happy moments too. This melancholic recollection does not last long, however, and the unanswered questions return. Mahler then presents us with an orchestral version of a bizarre song about the pointlessness of life. In it, St. Anthony preaches a sermon to a school of fish. At the end of the sermon, the fish leave one by one. The sermon has pleased them, but they don't change their ways and continue in vice. Mahler described this in another way. Watching a dance through a window and hearing no music. The turning and twisting seems senseless. The world looks like this when you lose yourself, distorted and crazy, as if reflected in a concave mirror. He cannot bear this feeling anymore and cries out in despair. A man stands on the edge. He searches in agony for the answers. Just then, a voice of childlike faith speaks in his ear. You are from God. Return to God. The loving God will light your way to eternal life. Mahler shows us a terrifying vision of the apocalypse. The earth shakes, the dead arise and march along in a mighty procession. Whether rich or poor, kings or beggars, all are equally terrified of divine judgment. There is an eerie calm, and the last trumpet sounds. 2 birds are the only beings left alive. The heavenly chorus calls on the dead to rise again, singing that we did not live in vain. Mahler finds answers to his big questions. We have all been divinely saved. Our search for answers has led us to God. He uses the orchestra and voices to conjure a breathtaking vision of eternal life. An overwhelming love lightens our being. We know, and we are.
Gustav Mahler, an Austrian composer born July 7, 1860, was a part of the late Romantic period of classical music composers. His Sixth Symphony was written between 1903 and 1904 and was premiered at the Saalbau Concert Hall in Essen, Germany on May 27, 1906, and it included a very peculiar instrument, the Mahler hammer. If you're not familiar with the Mahler hammer, chances are you may have seen it already, in GIF form. That's right, all of these percussionists giving their best impression of Thor, Odin's son, protector of Asgard, are actually playing their part in Gustav Mahler's Sixth Symphony. The symphony itself is in 4 movements, and there is a bit of controversy around which order to play the second and third movements. The first printed edition of the symphony has the scherzo as the second movement and the andante as the third movement. However, at the Essen premiere in 1906, Mahler conducted the symphony to play the andante second and the scherzo third. To this day, you can find performances of both variations. The hammer itself makes its appearance in the 4th and final movement of the symphony. Originally written with 3 hammer blows, Mahler later removed the last one, but you can find performances of both versions. The hammer blows are described by Mahler to be brief and mighty, but dull in resonance and with a non-metallic character, like the fall of an axe. That kind of sound is hard to create, especially the dull, non-metallic character that is called for. This has led to a surprising diversity of methods and devices to play the hammer blows. Most involve some sort of custom-made wooden mallet of varying size. Sometimes the mallet is used to strike a block of wood, sometimes a custom-made wooden box is built for the hammer to strike, and sometimes more traditional instruments like the bass drum are used to create the effect. Each of the hammer blows have been described as blows of fate to the hero or protagonist of the symphony that eventually destroy our hero. This analysis has some merit in the fact that after the hammer blows, the symphony reaches for a major resolution but eventually ends in the minor. No matter the method, the Mahler hammer is a great example of a non-traditional instrument being used in classical music.
Throughout the history of music, there have been countless geniuses who, through their art, make us look deeply into our own selves. Undoubtedly, the art of such musicians is often complex and requires reflection. One example of such a musician was the Austrian composer and conductor Gustav Mahler, a great European symphonist on the turn of the 20th century. Mahler was a composer and conductor, but in life he was perceived only as the latter. Starting from the very bottom, working in provincial theatres for years, many of his obstacles on the path to success were caused by his Jewish roots. At the end of the 19th century, Vienna turned more conservative and became a hotbed for anti-Semitism within the German-speaking society. Cosima Wagner, Richard Wagner's second wife, had a considerable influence on the music scene of the time and did much to resist Mahler's success on the basis of her fierce anti-Semitic views. Despite this, Mahler still reached the pinnacle of his career and became the director of the well-known Vienna State Opera. As a conductor, Mahler was obsessed with music. He put his whole soul into the performance of other composers' work as if they were his own. He was a ruthless and fanatical perfectionist. During rehearsals with an orchestra, he worked on every phrase and once was even known to repeat a musical fragment up to 80 times until passing out. Thus, the image of Mahler was becoming that of a fanatical tyrant, an uncontrollable man, instilling fear with his attacks of anger, whilst simultaneously showing his musicians great humanity, kindness and sensitivity. Orchestras adored their maestro and were even friends despite his oppressive nature. Yet, Mahler's personality was not best matched to a calm relationship. He inspired either fierce hatred or great love and devotion. Collectively, they felt that Mahler was burning himself. Perhaps that's why he lived so little, only 50 years. The composer himself never compromised, both when he wrote works without the hope of a performance and when he faced indifference and rejection from the opera houses of the day. Mahler's fame as a composer came to him only 50 years after his death. When the world understood the whole depth, grandeur and beauty of Mahler's music, it became quite clear that he belonged among the greatest symphonists of Europe, the likes of Beethoven, Tchaikovsky, Bruckner and Strauss. In his music, you can hear the themes of life and death, good and evil. Within it, you feel the desire for a romantic ideal, the search for harmony, and, at the same time, the bitterness of earthly suffering. But the main thing in his music is a man, strong and weak, loving, whilst at the same time suffering. His main works are 10 symphonies, the 10th being unfinished. Mahler incorporated the best of Austro-German symphonic traditions that started with Beethoven and drew to a close the Romantic era. Mahler's work had a great influence on the works of Schoenberg, Verben, Berg, Shostakovich, Hindemith, Stravinsky and Prokofiev. A key influence on Mahler's life was the legendary woman Alma Schindler, who went down in history as a companion to several prominent creative figures. This Viennese beauty, and Europe's most enviable bride, gave her heart to the 41-year-old Mahler, who, at the time, was Vienna's most influential conductor. She was his real muse, inspired by creativity, and accompanied the composer until the end of her life. She sacrificed her own compositional ambitions to be with Gustav and adapt to the tough rhythm of his life. She led home bookkeeping and even rewrote some of his scores. In 1907, grief burst into the family when their 4-year-old daughter Maria died. This event bordered on mysticism, as a few years earlier, Gustav had written the vocal cycle Kindertotenlieder, songs on the death of children. Mahler considered himself responsible for this meaningless death. The genial works of Gustav Mahler have passed the most important test of time. Over the past decade, Mahler has become one of the most performed European composers, and his music has become the most important part of the European Philharmonic program.
Answer the following reflection question. When listening to music, why is it a need to reflect on ourselves and experiences?